Hey everyone, it's Nightharo here, and today I've got an Arcanist healer guide for you. So I'm really excited about this. Hopefully you guys are too. I know that a lot of people have been watching my first take video on this, and I don't think anybody has really done too much of a video on Arcanist healer, at least not someone who does typically more in-depth guides. So yeah, let's go ahead and talk about it. The Arcanist healer, for those who don't know, is by far, by far the most complex healer in the game. It blows everything else out of the water. So just keep that in mind. There's a lot to learn here. I am going to do my best to go through and talk about quite a bit, but probably what I'm going to do is be releasing a series of shorter videos that will go more in depth and will only be like 5 or 6 minutes long, definitely less than 10, talking about individual topics, because I think if I make this an hour-long video, no one's going to watch it, and then you're going to be like, wait, I need to know this information, there was something I forgot, and you're not going to be able to find it very easily, even if I timestamp everything. So that's the format I'm going to go with here. If you have feedback on that, let me know. I love feedback, even if it's like, hey, I don't like this, or this isn't good. Send it my way. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pop up the bar here, or our cheat sheet. So this is available here on YouTube on my community tab. You can also find it in That Was in the Boss Discord if you want to download it. It's yours. Do whatever you want with it. Mark it up, whatever, just for your own personal use. Feel free. So the idea here with this card is that you have flex spots. But again, I mentioned Arcanists are extremely complicated. These flex spots are not meant to just be flexed with the skills below them. It's just kind of there's a reason you might not want to run that skill at the top, and you can put any flex skill that you do need to run there instead. So don't think that if I'm saying, hey, you know, I put race against time under some skill like Crux Weave Armor, doesn't mean that I think that's the only place you should put that. I just am denoting that that is a flex spot, and I've included a lot of skills here that you might be asked to have in any kind of trial setting that you might not necessarily need in 4-mans and other kind of group settings. So just keep that in mind as well. So we'll go through each and every one of these skills though, and I'll talk more about when you would use it, when you would not use it. All right, let's go ahead and start out on our resto staff on our front bar. We have Healing Springs. So we're using this for the recovery. It's a huge amount of recovery, makes our job a lot easier. There have been some change to combat prayer being more expensive and a few other things. So we've kind of moved as a community to the other morph. If you still use Illustrious Healing, I would still argue that there are certain situations where you're trying to keep buffs up and stuff like that, and when you don't need extra healing, you need the longer duration, so you save an extra GCD, and that's why at times I have recommended Illustrious Healing. I still feel that way, but for the most part, you can use Healing Springs and you'll be just fine and won't be an issue. After that, here we have our first flex spot, but we're going to use Curative Surge for the most part. This is our beam that does a ton of healing. So just in testing on this, average heals per second, I believe, were around 10,000 to 12,000. The ramp up on this particular morph, the last second, I was seeing healing that was about 30,000. It would actually be 20,000 on the low end, or 22,000 on the low end with no crits the last second, which is 3 casts, so very unlikely to happen, but I was still getting 22k with that. And then with more crits, or I think with all crits actually, I think it was getting like 40k. So just keep that in mind. This could be 40k per second, it could be 22k per second. You should actually get a bit more than that because the setup I had, it was quickly thrown together on PTS, and I don't think I had a few things that would increase your healing, but you should roughly get somewhere in that range, within a couple of thousand of that. So this is a huge heal, and it heals for a lot, average of again around 10 to 12,000 per second, but then it ramps up quite a bit at the end. So this is what we use to spend our Crux and whenever we need a big heal. If there's a situation where you have some sort of heal check and you have all your other hots up, this is what you would then use. You definitely want to make sure you've got all your Crux up, all 3 Crux to consume whenever you cast this. The other morph where it heals lower health allies for more is also fine. I've had a lot of people that prefer that. Looking at the numbers, I don't prefer it, but it is an option. It might be something, there could be a reason that you want to use it. I don't think there's a clear, definitive, like this one's bad, this one's good, but I do think, obviously what I recommended is what I recommend. So I think it's better, but someone might disagree, and I just want to point out that there is some gray area there. After that, we have Combat Prayer. Of course, combat prayer, never gonna leave our bar. We wanna make sure we're casting this twice every 10 seconds, or at least that we're making sure that we're keeping our buffs up on our group if we're the only group healer. You can, if you have something like buff the group or something, you can keep track of that pretty easily. Obviously, if you're on console, I'm sure you guys might have to talk to your local raid league, because I'm not sure what you guys do, and I forgot to ask. I have some friends on console that I like to consult about this stuff, but I forgot to ask what they do for this. But generally, 2 casts every 10 seconds will keep up the buffs on that. And it gives minor berserk, which increases everybody's damage done by 5%, and it also reduces their damage taken by providing minor resistances for their armor. After that, we have our Ruin of the Colorless Pool. This provides both minor vulnerability and minor brittle, which both typically come from a warden. And especially if you have like a brittled and DPS, they provide both of these skills. So this one skill completely replaces an entire setup of an entire class that was really fun. Brittledens will still do just as much damage as they would before. You just need them a little bit less now. Having this one skill that does all of these things is awesome. It makes keeping buff up times really good. You'll almost always want to run this unless you have someone covering both those skills. If you have a warden DPS, unless they're doing something really weird and probably suboptimal, they'll already be providing that minor vulnerability from their fetcher. Both morphs, it's just a common skill. If you have a warden healer, they might be running it as well. Brittle, you have several places you can get that from, but this is absolutely the easiest. If you have a Brittleden, they'll be able to keep it up just fine. So if you have a Brittleden, you won't need this skill potentially, because they'll be able to keep those buffs up, so you could drop it in that situation. If you have a warden, and then you have a tank that's keeping up brittle, or a healer or someone, then you might also not need this skill, so you could drop it in that situation. But most of the time, I think you'll be running this, because most groups just aren't that sweaty. And then after that, we have our Fulminating Ruin. The reason we're using this is for the extra, it gives 3 synergies to our allies, and that's going to be a lot of damage, extra damage that we can do, and it's an extra synergy for them to get back resources, so that's really nice. If you're not trying to worry about damage, you're just trying to stay alive, this might be one of the skills that you replace. It might be one of the first skills you want to replace. After that, we have Barrier on our front bar. We're using this both in case we ever need to use Barrier, which hopefully we don't. Typically we want to save our ultimate for something that increases DPS, but the other reason we keep it is for the passive. It's going to give us an extra, I believe, 10% increase mag recovery just for having it on our bar, and so that's why we have it here. I will note that there are situations where you might have different gear setups, and you might want to swap where you have your ultimate set and swap one from the one bar to the other. That's typically what you do. You just swap both, but a lot of times you'll have like a special resto staff here, and so if you are running certain gear setups, you might want to have the ultimate that you generally use on your destro staff bar, because you have a broken 5-piece set on your front bar, your resto bar. And so just keep that in mind and swap accordingly. If that's confusing, I'll explain more either later in another video, but you always feel free to ask. Hopefully that's clear. That's kind of a more advanced thing, so if that's confusing for you, don't worry about it for now. Again, always welcome to come by the That Was the Boss Discord server, or ask me questions below and I'll be glad to answer them, and maybe point you to a different video that maybe I explain it for you better. Now moving on to the back bar, we have our destro staff bar here. We have our Wall of Elements. We typically keep that there to make sure we keep our enchant procced. Just having our Wall of Elements down and ticking will generally keep our enchant procced in that situation, and so that's why we have it here. You could actually drop this skill. I don't necessarily have anything below it, but this is a skill that if you're light attack weaving, you'll tend to keep up your enchant 100% of the time anyways, and so it is a place where you could potentially use it as another flex spot, but just as a standard build, typically you'll leave this here. After that, we have our Crux Weaver Armor. This is a really nice skill that will generate crux for us. If we're taking damage, once every 5 seconds, it'll generate a crux. So in a lot of fights, I would say most fights, you are taking a little bit of damage, even if it's not much. So this will be an extra crux every 5 seconds, so that we can then use our beam more, or having crux, each crux gives us 3% extra healing, so that's pretty nice. There are also several passives that proc whenever we gain and use crux, and so we do, generally speaking, want to have a cycle. It's a really long cycle. It's like once every, I think, 8 seconds for ulti generation, around there, and then it's like 12 seconds for other buffs and benefits. You don't really need to know too much about it unless you want to, but just know that it's a thing, and maybe I'll pop it up a little bit later and we can talk about it. But having Crux Armor here can be really useful. This is a skill though you don't absolutely have, so keep in mind you could flex this out to something else if you needed something on your bar. After that we have Vigor, and of course we're using the non-selfish morph because we want to provide the benefit of healing to the rest of our group. I will note that this typically doesn't proc on the entire group, so you will have to cast it twice. It'll proc on 4 people plus yourself each time you cast it. So this is a lot of people are like, wait, why am I using Vigor? This is kind of a weird skill. Vigor is the best sticky hot in the game, and what I mean by that is you cast it, they have to be in the area, but if they are in the area and then they leave, the heal over time sticks onto them, and it lasts for 16 seconds, which is a decent amount of time. He only heals every 2 seconds. It's not every second. But it does enough healing that it's one of the best ones you can use. So if you have a situation where people are stacked and then they're going to spread, or you want to make sure that they're always getting hit, even if they have to move a little bit, proc it when they're in the area, and then if they move out, it's fine. It'll still keep ticking on them. There are a handful of situations. I have a lot of friends that argue with me about this. We just have disagreements. There are situations where you could drop this, where everybody's standing still and you don't necessarily need it. It's still a really good heal, so I think most of them just leave it on their bar, but you could swap to something else there if you didn't need the extra heals. And a lot of times they're talking about situations that are not common for the average player, like hard modes and stuff like that. But just know that it's a good hot. Generally you'll want to use it. If you do swap it out, well, we'll talk about that soon. Last step here for our skills we're not going to swap out. We only have a couple of them. Last one here is going to be our Zenith's Empowering Disc. So what this does is it gives the buff Minor Courage to anybody inside the circle, and then we choose the morph that even after they leave that circle, they still have the buff for an additional 10 seconds. The reason for that is most fights, people are moving around and stuff like that, and if the buff just drops off as soon as they leave the circle, you're not going to get 100% uptimes. And if you just choose Zenith's Empowering Disc, you pretty much will on most fights. Now, sometimes people are spread crazy, or you're in a formation or whatever. There's situations where you won't. But by and large, I think the extra 10 seconds of buff is what I would prefer in my groups for the increased damage. The Healing Morph too doesn't heal very much. It's not like a huge heal, so that's also why I'm not like, oh, the Healing Morph. But either is technically fine, but I would, generally speaking, unless you're just in a stack and burn situation, I would tend to go with Zenith's Empowering Disc. After that, we have our Energy Orb. This is from the Undaunted skill line. It's a really good heal over time. You do want to be careful where you cast this. You know, if you're standing right up next to a group and they move a little bit, like they could move out of range of it. But generally, if you're behind the group and you cast this, they're going to get hit with it for pretty much all of the ticks in most situations. And it's a really good heal over time. But again, if you don't need it, you could swap out with something else. Glyphic of the Tides. So this is one of the really cool new specialty or benefits of having an Arcanist healer, and that's being able to cast this ability. Glyphic of the Tides increases our weapon and spell damage by everybody inside the circle by 200. And this particular morph also provides major protection once it's healed up to full. Major protection is huge. That's a lot of reduced damage taken for your party. So if there's a situation where there's a bunch of damage going out and you're trying to heal through it, and hopefully maybe the DPS are trying to parse through it, like on Teleria, the last boss, if you're trying to parse through the last couple of mechanics, and you drop this, it's really going to help. You're going to notice that 10% difference in damage taken, absolutely. Also, the increased damage, this is a unique buff, so you can only get this from Arcanists, which is really cool. So it provides a unique buff for them. Kind of think of this as how the Colossus was for Necromancers. This is kind of something else replacing that, where it's like a unique group buff that only Arcanists can give. And it's a DPS loss for the DPS to use it, so that's why a healer or a tank would typically use it. And honestly, yeah, this is something I'd probably generally keep on my bar. There might be a situation where you're instead asked to run a Warhorn, so that's why we have it here as our flex spot. You want aggressive Warhorn just for the group buffs as well. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about our flex spots. And as I'm talking about this and I'm kind of going through stuff to keep this video at a reasonable length of time, I think I am going to talk about Crux generation for healers. in a separate video where I can just talk about that. I will note that we have skills. Our beam is our primary use of using our crux, and then something like our crux weaver armor is generally speaking what we're going to be using to get crux, and I'll mention some other things as well. You want to be generating and using crux to get the most out of your Arcanist healer, to generate ulti, to make sure that you have increased critical healing, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's a good idea to do. So you generally want to make sure that you have something that both generates and consumes crux on your bar in an ideal situation. If nothing else, something that generates crux. But we'll talk more in depth about how to do that. And there's a lot of different ways and switching of morphs that you can do that. So if you find a way that works for you and it's working well, go with it. You know, if you find a better way, switch. But like if you find something that works well for you and you don't want to do what I am recommending here, that's totally fine. I just want to put that out there. It's okay. There's a lot of room here, and there's a lot of people that are going to make a lot of very confident statements about this is best, and they might be right, but they might be wrong just as often. Is usually my take. The people that yell the loudest usually know the least. Unfortunately, that's just my hot take. Okay, let's talk about each one of these skills. All right, first up is Healing Ward. So this is something that is used very situationally. If you're doing Sunspire, the tombs in Sunspire, this is a great skill to use right after they go into the tomb. Their health drops. You cast this on them. It prevents them from taking more damage and it heals them. The reason you use shields like this in this particular skill is because when targets, there's a lot of things that drop someone's health really low and then they give a huge healing debuff. So your heals are only doing like 20% of what they normally would. Well, if someone is taking more damage, it makes it impossible sometimes, or at least very hard to heal them out of that. And so having something that prevents them from taking more damage while they have that healing debuff can be extremely helpful. So this is a skill you can use. We also have a class skill that I'll talk about a little bit later. Another option here would be Radiating Regeneration. This is a sticky hot. It's the one where you stick your staff up in the air and it will heal, I think, 4 people around you. So you have to cast it multiple times to get the whole group. It only lasts for like 10 seconds. So it's a little bit hard to use, but whenever you have fights where everybody's really mobile, this can be a skill that you want to use, or if you have a new group. I will note that, don't be afraid to use this skill, but I will note that a lot of new healers, they use this as their spammable. It's great in dungeons. In trials, it's not the best skill to use. And it would usually is better to get the group to do what they're supposed to and stack. That's going to make your life a lot easier, as opposed to trying to heal people when they're running and acting crazy, running everywhere. So just keep that in mind. I know that's kind of almost a raid league kind of thing, but I see a lot of newer healers and maybe even experienced healers using this too much. It's not that great of a heal. And so if you can get people to stick in the right spot, you can heal them in place using something like Combat Prayer or some other kind of heal. So we have our Chakram of Destiny and our Title Chakram. So Chakram of Destiny will generate crux for us. If we cast it again, it'll increase the shield on targets that are being hit a second time by 30%. This is a way of generating crux if you need one. I will also note, this is really interesting, I'm going to do a stamina healer build guide for this. The stamina morph of both chakrams here, of both shield chakrams, are like 1,000. They cost like 1,000 stamina than they would magicka. So they're way cheaper, which I thought is interesting, and kind of makes it where like you could make you could make a stamina healer and use this skill often, and it would be a lot cheaper. But Chakram of Destiny generates a crux, and then again, if you recast it, you can get a little bit bigger shield. The other morph, Title Chakram, it consumes crux, and then based on the amount of crux that it consumes, the shield will heal for 33%. So up to basically 100% of the shield's health while the shield remains. I will also note with both of these, the duration is fairly short, 6 seconds, but if you're the Rojo healer, it increases the duration of these up to 8 seconds. So keep that in mind. Situations where you would use these chakrams and where they're most useful for is the same situations where you'd use something like Radiating Regen, this thing, or something like Vigor, where it's a sticky hot. The group is spread out a lot and you want to be able to hit all of them. So that's the main situation there. Typically, if you can hit someone with ground hots, that is a better thing to do. But if you have a crazy group or whatever, this is a skill you could use instead. I will also note with the Tidal Chakram, it seems like there's a situation like in Cloud Rest where everybody takes Baneful at the end and you could throw this out and consume Crux and then heal them for a bunch as well as shielding them. Seems like it could be a pretty good skill for that. It's also a little weird though, because I would think that your Beam might be a better skill to use there, and that also consumes Crux. So it's kind of a weird situation where like you might want to use this, but you would also probably rather just use the Beam. So, you know, 6 one way, half a dozen the other. This is only going to hit 4 people. A note about heals, a lot of people think that when you drop a ground hot, it hits everybody. Typically, it actually only hits 6 people. So another thing to keep in mind, even though you have 8 to 10 people standing in a stack, maybe 12, but probably, you know, more like 8, it's only going to heal 6 people, and it'll choose the 6 people with the lowest health every second. So again, both morphs of this are fine. I personally would generally use the Tidal Chakram for the increased Crux generation that it provides. After that, we have Bone Shield. This is something that we typically use in Cloud Rest mainly. And the reason you use it is because of the synergy that other players can use, both for the shield and also for the increased healing received, particularly during Baneful. So you'll oftentimes be asked to run this as a healer for Cloud Rest. There are other situations where you could use it for basically the same reason, but Cloud Rest is the main one. So kind of a specific skill, but you know, you want to have it if you're going to be asked to use it. After that, we have our Overflowing Altar. I recommend the Overflowing Morph, even though it does hurt you for more. The extra, what is it, like 10 or 20% heal, the extra heal on it that it provides is huge for tanks. And that's the main reason you're usually running this. It gives them kind of an oh shit heal that they can hit a synergy and get instantly healed. I've done the math on this and talked about it before, but I'll just mention it here, I guess. You know, you see a tank's health drop and then you have to react. Usually at least 2 seconds have gone by before that happens, sometimes 3 or 4. With a synergy heal, they can see they took a bunch of damage, hit a synergy outside of a global cooldown. You can hit synergies anytime before or after a skill and still cast the skill. It doesn't take any time as long as you hit the button and you're not channeling or currently casting. It'll do it as soon as you're done. And that will give them a huge heal, and it'll give them several seconds before you could even possibly react and actually get a heal to them. So that's why this is such a big deal, to always have at least one healer in the group with an altar down. And then after that, we have our Purge. So this is Efficient Purge. It's very important that you get to the morph of this. The non-efficient Purge costs like almost 8,000, like 7,500 Magicka. And then this costs almost half as much. So it's still very expensive, but if you need a Purge in certain places, which you absolutely will, this is what you'll want to use for the group. And you want to make sure that you've leveled it up so that you can morph it to the Efficient Purge. Now moving on to our back bar here, we have Race Against Time. This is from the Psijic skill line. This is not a super commonly used skill, but sometimes you need a little bit of speed. Again, particularly Cloud Rest, you notice a theme, Cloud Rest. Some of these mini trials are kind of the exception to most of the other trial mechanics, but there are places where you'll need a little bit of speed, so having Race Against Time, an instant cast skill that you can hit and get a burst of speed, can be life-saving and something you absolutely want to have on your bar. It also reduces or takes away a snaring effect, so it takes away any kind of slow you have and gives you that speed boost. Also a reason to use it in certain situations so that you're not snared. After that, we have another skill that will actually give us some Crux, and that is Evolving Runemend. The reason I recommend Evolving Runemend, it gives a little bit of a heal over time. The other morph of this, Audacious Runemend, would provide a little bit of ulti, but target has to be at low health, below 50% health, and you have to hit them with a single target heal. So you're only giving a little bit of extra ultimate to one target, and then it just doesn't make sense. The skill is almost never going to be used, to be totally honest with you. Maybe if you would use it to heal yourself, if you're in some sort of solo situation and you want to generate more ulti, but by and large, this is going to be a wasted skill, and I would just go with Evolving Runemend. The extra heal over time is going to be helpful. The other one, it's just very highly situational, only applies to one target, and is just probably not worth it. But if you need a single target burst heal, this is what you would use. Is it amazing and mind-blowing? Absolutely not. But if you're at range, or you want something that doesn't last for 4 seconds where you got a channel or whatever, this could be a reason to use the skill. Also, it generates a Crux, so this is another way you can generate Crux. Really useful if you have heal checks in the new trial, Sanity's Edge, the first boss, where you have to turn around and like heal the main tank periodically, or if you have someone moved out of group to interrupt or bash or something. Those are all reasonable situations where you'd want to use this, where you certainly wouldn't want to try to use your beam because it just wouldn't make sense. But just as kind of an FYI, I guess. Next up here is going to be Circle of Protection. So this is a good heal over time. It does cost stamina. It is a stamina based one. It also provides minor protection. It reduces targets damage taken by 5%, which is significant, especially for your DPS. So that's why we like this skill. It's a good heal, and then it also provides that minor protection. The only downside is that, a little bit smaller area. It's not incredibly small, but you could have targets moving out of it, mobile fights. You don't want to use this. A quick note about this kind of seems a little bit weird because it's like a stamina heal. At least to me, it feels weird. I always think of healing as being a Magicka thing. Most heals in the game heal for pretty close to the same amount. Like most areas, HOTS, heal over times, heal for about the same amount. So for example, Energy Orb, when I test that out in my general basic healer build, I usually get about 1700, so 1700 heals per second with that. If I use something else, I might get, I'm trying to think of which skill, maybe Circle of Protection. I think it was like 1500, so 1500 heals per second, which is like close to 10%, a little bit over, but most of them heal for pretty comparable. Same thing with Healing Springs. You'll find it heals pretty close to that. Sometimes people think that one heal is much better than the other, and they've never tested it out. Usually they're pretty close to each other. Energy Orb is one of the best ones. I think it's probably generally up there at the top, but a lot of these other ones heal pretty well too. And then last up here, on as far as this flex spot, we have Crushing Shock. The reason you might want to level this, you just need to level it up to be able to morph it to Crushing Shock, and that's because it interrupts. And there's a lot of situations where you as a healer will want to interrupt or be able to interrupt for your group. It'll just be easiest for you to do. It will keep the party from reducing their DPS done, etc., etc. So having Crushing Shock leveled and being able to put it on your bar is always a great idea. And then the last two here, one is Mystic Guard. So Guard is used typically whenever the tank is going to be taking a lot of damage, or if you have a new tank, to kind of give them a chance to, get a break. The problem with this skill is that you do have to slot it on both bars for it to remain active. Otherwise, every time you bar swap. So even though I've only put it on one bar, it's because there's so much on this card to begin with. I didn't want to take up too much space, but you would have to put it on both bars to make sure it stays active. It also has a range. You'll see the tether, and as you get further away, it gets smaller and smaller. So you do need to be mindful of that and make sure that you stay close to that target. And that can be a little bit tricky, but this can be a great skill to help out new tanks and keep them alive. Another skill here, and our last one as far as our flex spots, is going to be Elemental Susceptibility. This is a way of applying Major Breach to targets and also doing a little bit of damage and applying a little bit of status effects. So we like this for places like Cloud Rest, or any place where you might need to debuff a target for the DPS where the tank can't. Orbs, when they come up, you'll be spamming this skill on them to allow your Orb Crusher and Cloud Rest to kill those targets quicker. And there are a few others that might be useful for this skill. Really great one, definitely something I would level and have prepared to use, much more so than even some of these other ones that are a little bit more obscure. Man, I know that was a lot, guys. I told you it's like the most complicated class yet, and honestly, there's still more stuff I could have said and more info I could have given. But let's go ahead and move on here. So we're going to talk about slottable CP. For our blue CP, Soothing Tide, Swift Renewal, I would always keep on pretty much all situations, because most of our heals are heal over times and area of effect heals, so that's the best thing to run there. Then one healer needs to be running Enlivening Overflow and the other one Hope Infusion. That's the general setup, so you don't need both healers running both of these things. So work with the other healer if you're in a trial and make sure that only one of you is running it. If you're running solo, you can just kind of pick and choose what you think is best given the situation you're going to be facing, or just pick one of them and just go with it. After that, we have From the Brink, Salve of Renewal, or Focus Mending. So there are situations where you might want to use all three of these. So let's start off here with Salve of Renewal. So this is a very situational thing, but if you're in a trial or a dungeon that is applying negative status effects and you're having to cleanse them, this will provide a heal for that target. And you know, a lot of times you want to be able to heal them and purge them at the same time. So places like Maw of Lorcage, or in the Clockwork in Halls of Fabrication, the first boss in particular, any situation that we're having to cleanse a target, being able to get them a burst heal when you cleanse them is a huge deal. And so that's why you might want this. It's massive whenever there's a good reason to use it. It is completely useless if you don't. So keep that in mind, something you'll have to flex in whenever you need it. Next up is Focus Mending. This is one that is generally useful, but I don't think you'll actually be using very often. It increases your single target HOT. So if you're doing something like Tombs and Veteran Sunspire, that's a great use for it. Anytime you have a heal check on a single target, this could be useful. And then From the Brink. So whenever you heal a target that's about to die under 25% health, you provide them with a damage shield for 6 seconds. This is another like kind of oh shit moment. Will keep people from dying when you're having to panic heal them because they're standing in red or doing something else to try to commit suicide. So that's why you might want to flex this in. And anything else here that you think might be useful, there's a few others, but I don't want to make this, you know, longer than it needs to be. I'll try to cover that maybe in a standalone video. But I think these are good enough that they should cover most situations for you. For a red CP, the only thing I strongly recommend is Rejuvenation for the extra recovery. You don't necessarily need that, but it can be helpful. And Red Tree is otherwise, choose whatever you want. Anything that makes sense for you. There's plenty of skills that do. I've got them on other cards. Take a look if you want. But anything you want to do with a Red Tree, you're welcome to. Celerity for the extra speed, maybe a free roll dodge, free chance to break free, all that kind of stuff is super helpful depending on the situation. Now let's go ahead and talk about gear here because I do want to be complete. So there's typically 2 main setups that you want to have ready for any optimized group. And as you're leveling, you just kind of work on it and get this stuff as you can. The first setup is going to be your SPC healer. So you're going to do Spell Power Cure, which drops from White Gold Tower. And then you're going to pair that with one other set, typically Pillager's Prophet, which drops from Dreadcell Reef. You do not need perfected gear. Go farm it on normal. That's all you need. Pillager's Prophet, great set. Whenever you use ultimate, you give ultimate to everybody else around you. That's why it's so useful. And generally, it would be great in an ideal situation for an Arcanist healer to be the SPC and Pillager's Prophet healer, so that they can use on cooldown their class ultimate to give everybody the damage buff, and also to use Pillager's Prophet, the 5-piece set. In addition to that, something like Symphony of Blades, which is a monster set which drops some Depths of Malatar. That is a hard to get set, but it's really the main core healer set. It just increases everybody's recovery whenever you heal them, so that's why it's great for you. The other setup would be Rojo, which would be Roaring Opportunist and Jorvold's Guidance. Roaring Opportunist drops from the Trial Kind's Aegis, and then Jorvold's just increases the duration on that time. So the idea with these 2 sets together, you always use them together, but you heavy attack. And I do that because that's kind of what the Sork heavy attack looks like. You heavy attack, and then you'll have to do this twice, and it gives the buff to the group. If you're in a PC situation, you usually have buffs. It's called Roaring Opportunist. I've done a video talking about this. You can go look at it. But that's how that works. And then you'll pair it with either a monster set, or maybe more typically something like Spalder of Ruin, which is a shoulder piece, so you can't wear a monster set with this. And then for your helm, you can just wear whatever you want. A lot of times I just wear a Slime Crawl because I have it for my DPS. It's increased critical, which will increase your critical healing chance, but anything that you want and that makes sense to you, you could wear for your head. But then Spalder of Ruin, you do have to crouch to activate that. It is a mythic, so you do have to go farm it. So that can be an issue for some people. You also might want to run something typically like a Master's Resto or the Black Rose Prison Resto on your front bar. And so you would just single bar in this situation, probably your Roaring Opportunist, and then you only heavy attack on that back bar to proc that. But that's a little bit more complicated. You can also run the same, Master's Resto or whatever if you're doing Spell Power Cure and Pillager's Prophet. You just want to make sure that you're using the ultimate where you have Pillager's Prophet as your 5-piece set, and keep Spell Power Cure 5-piece all the time, because otherwise the buffs will drop off. So I know that's a little bit confusing. If you have questions about it, ask me below. If I think I've done some videos on that, and if I haven't and I get a lot of questions, I'll make a video about it, just kind of help you guys out. So just let me know if it's confusing. For Magicka, stack all Magicka. For Mundus, I recommend the Ritual, which increases your healing done. If you're running a lot of dungeons and you find yourself having to DPS and heal because the DPS is really bad, I would slot the beam and then generate Crux and use the DPS beam. And then if in that situation, I would go with the Thief Mundus for more increased critical chance, which will also help your heals, but it'll help your damage as well. There's several other Munduses you could use, but you know, if it looks good and there's a reason for you to use it, feel free to use it. Generally speaking, just go with max healing. For food, use whatever you need. Something like Witch Brothers Potent Brew is just fine. It's going to give you max health, max magicka, and magicka recovery. If you find that you don't need the max health, you could drop that and go with something that only provides max magicka, and then either magicka or stamina recovery, depending on how many stamina costing skills you have on your bar. But you can kind of flex and use whatever you need for that. I have put here on this card some other sets that you might use. I'm not going to go into them right now. This video is already going very long. Additionally, some of the passives and how that kind of stuff works, I'm going to go over that in another video. So I think we're kind of going to leave it here for now. And I think that's it for this build. I know that's a lot. If I missed anything, hit me up in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer questions. And again, look in the future weeks because I'll be doing some shorter videos kind of going more in depth into some of these topics. Appreciate everybody watching. I love making these videos and I appreciate that you guys give me the opportunity to make them. So again, I can't say thank you enough. We'll catch you in the next one.